Wow.
Yeah, got a packed room.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much. Well, thank you so much for coming. And I guess we'll just launch into like, how did you come across this whole world and story?
Okay, me. Well, Jack and I were just finishing film school about 11 years ago, and we went out for the first time with a project kind of out of school. And I think being fresh from film school, we were thinking a lot about the gaze and framing and that sort of thing. And so when we got there, when we were expecting to see wild polar bears, there are wild polar bears, but it was just so interesting that everyone was lined up to get the same shot, and the shot that was valuable to them was one where it was just the bear with the snow and the rocks and no human infrastructure, despite the fact that right next to them, was a dump or an airport or whatever else. And we were like, it's just a lot more interesting if you widen out a bit. And so that really hooked us, and then we spent a lot of time there. Then people started saying, oh, well, if you think this is interesting, there's another community really close by. Oftentimes people in Churchill would bring it up as though like it's terrible over there, they kill bears kind of thing. And we wanted to explore that because we figured that probably wasn't, what we were gonna experience.
I mean, it was our first wildlife film. It may be our last.
Probably our last.
It was a 10-year endeavor, and there's no way we can summarize it in a succinct way, but it was very difficult, as you might imagine, and we were very much discovering it as we went. A lot of the things that you saw we had no idea about, and so as much as we sort of put ourselves out there continuously, it did feel like it was kind of something that was happening to us at the same time, and that was really kind of a spiritual experience, to be honest.
Yeah. And so what was it like to approach the Native community and your narrator, and to develop a relationship with them and the trust that we feel in this film?
Yeah. Well, you obviously don't just kind of go up there and say, hey, do you want to be the narrator for the film? It takes 7 years, and you have to go before a council of elders and get permission to even film polar bears in the town. And so getting sort of permission from Mike was really the final step of a long consultative process with Arviat, which began with getting the right permits and just sitting and drinking tea and sitting on people's couches and listening to stories. And after many years of kind of doing this, we met some of the executive producers on our film who were cultural liaison. Joe Karatak, who's also an Inuit elder and does a lot of work preserving Inuit knowledge, and he was a close friend with Mike, and they worked together on different sort of like knowledge projects, and so he thought that Mike actually might be interested in participating in the film because Mike himself, the narrator, was a trauma counselor, but he didn't have the opportunity to sort of talk about what had happened to him, and so Joe proposed to Mike that he be the narrator for the film and that it be some kind of therapeutic art process, and it was just an incredible gift.
Wow, amazing. Well, I think we'll open it up to questions. I think we probably got a few of them out there. Just go ahead.
Can you talk about the music? I found it fascinating. Like it gets you almost into the state of mind of the bear. Can you talk about how that process happened?
Yeah, we're super lucky as first-time filmmakers to get to work with someone like Cristobal. If maybe some of you have seen The White Lotus, that's what he's most famous for. And he had, funnily enough, quit The White Lotus when we were looking for composers, so our producer was like, maybe now's the time.
And it was.
And so we sent him a letter, because he's such a capital A artist. His work is so, and I think that's a testament to him quitting that show too, is just, he's very, what you'd expect from an artist. And so we were really lucky because we brought him on board before we had completely finished shooting and the edit. So we had some scenes that we could share with him, and what was really cool about him was that he immediately wanted to meet. He loved the short film that we made of the same title before this. He almost talked himself out of a job because he loved that the short film had no music. He thought it was like pure in a certain way, and we didn't really have to give him very much direction. The only thing that we had as a note when we first met with him, he brought up himself, which was that we didn't want an over-sentimental, like big orchestral, weepy kind of score. We wanted something that was a bit more abstract and that the bear would have a theme. And he's famous for incorporating voices into the percussiveness of his work. And I managed to get I managed to convince the wildlife officer to take a mic into the polar bear jail, and he was like, "Are you sure you want that? This bear hates me." I was like, "Yes, I want that. Just point the mic at the bear that hates you." So he came back out, and what a lot of people don't know about polar bears is that they actually hiss, like cats, as well as growl and do all these other things. Anyway, so he managed to splice some of that into the main bear theme that you heard.
Wow, amazing. Yeah.
Hi, could you talk about how you were able to achieve some of the formalistic cinematography, tracking shots, like Vanden?
Yeah. Well, Gabby and I are cinematographers by trade initially, and so that's sort of how we got into filmmaking. It's kind of what we fell in love with. And so, as you could probably tell, this was a cinematographer's dream movie. And we didn't know anything about these camera systems when we started this project. I think we spent many years trying to unlock this bear's point of view, so to speak. And we were watching BBC's The Hunt or something like that, and they have the featurettes at the end of the show, and it was a polar bear episode, and they had these incredible camera systems that had been originally designed for helicopters and aerial photography that they...
They're 6-axis stabilizers,
yeah,
so
it's
they're really robust.
It's a gimbal, but it's a really high-end gimbal, and it's fully enclosed, and you can put a 50 to 1,000 mil lens in it, which for any photographers, it's an enormous lens. It's like a 20-pound lens. There's no other stabilizer in the world that can do this. And so we knew that if we were going to try to tell this story in this kind of artful way, we needed that particular tool, that paintbrush, but we wanted to use it in an unconventional way. And so that was kind of the thesis for it. And then we had to go get trained on the equipment and bring people up who were mechanics to be able to fix it when it broke. And
yeah, and we didn't really have the budget to have that kind of equipment, so we were really lucky that there was a strike and some of this equipment was available, and there was a really great wildlife production company that basically gave it to us for very little.
Yeah, I think because we made this short film that I think people could connect to somehow, it really gave us a lot of, people really wanted to help us. And so this whole thing has been this just incredible journey of people, just this amazing generosity. So it wouldn't have been possible without all the support from these different individuals and these different companies.
But it's worth saying having the camera on the car serves a lot of purposes. One, it allows you to have this cinematic sort of ability to follow along, because especially with wildlife, if you're bumbling around with a tripod, you're gonna miss it. You're just gonna totally miss the moment. And then two, it was good for safety for us and for the bears, because we didn't have to go outside to swap cards or batteries or anything like that. We could do everything from inside. We keep ourselves safe and therefore keep the bears safe.
Yeah, usually we're filming at a greater distance than any of the other photographers or the wildlife officers. We're about 100 feet away.
And then we shot a lot at magic hour. A lot at magic hour.
Nice, yeah.
This would be, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but the movies are so much about the killing of traditional knowledge, and I want to know maybe what kind of conversations about that in terms of the construction of that traditional knowledge.
Yeah, so one of our collaborators, Michael Code, not Mike the narrator, he's Dene, so he's from Churchill area, and he's a really great wildlife photographer. And we had really early conversations before we even did the short with him, where even within wildlife, there's a lot of these colonial structures that I don't think we all realize, like with wildlife filmmaking. For example, having this idea of animals, in their natural habitat, we exclude the reality of human infrastructure oftentimes when we're looking at these things. And it relates a lot to how Indigenous people were treated in, especially the Americas, with Manifest Destiny. If you remove people from the land, if you have areas where there aren't humans, then governments can take it over. And so this was a very important ideology, and I thought it was really interesting when we talked to him about how that ripples through into the media that we consume. And so he was saying, a lot of the time, the filmmakers that go out to see these animals are led by an Indigenous person, and then the camera's never pointed on that person. So that was very important to us from the beginning, and something that we hoped infused into it. But then through conversations with Mike, what was really beautiful was that we all came to the conclusion, you know, as he talked about the trauma that he experienced, not only with his son, but with, you know, just residential schools and the way the governments have treated people, he started to empathize with the bear and feel that, and made that sort of conclusion that a lot of those traumas that they're experiencing are similar, or that they're related. And so that was a really cool thing that we all came to together.
Did you screen? I presume you screened film in that community, and how was it received?
It's actually a very tricky question because of the trauma around Mike's son's death. It was very dramatic. Like the whole community was kind of traumatized. So it's taken us a long time to actually get to the point where we could even be in a position to show the community at large. But we're going to have a screening later this year in both communities, and that's partly why it's taken a bit longer, is that we need to show them both at the same time. Otherwise, one will feel left out or whatnot. And then,
yeah,
go on.
We're also working with a really great Inuit-run distribution company, and so the reality is, in a lot of these communities, they don't have theaters. So we want to do like a traveling show where they create theaters in these communities so people can watch. Mike's whole family has seen the film, and they're really proud of it. Mike saw most of it, obviously not all of it, because he passed away as we were finishing up the film. But yeah, so we're going to have these community screenings soon, but everyone who's participated in the film has seen it.
Did you have a story and then you made the bears tell the story, or did you have tons of like hours of bear and then you said, wow, look at this story?
Yeah, it's both. We kind of had a basic structure. You know, we wanted to juxtapose these two communities that had very different beliefs about the bears. And we wanted to have the bear lift be in the middle and you sort of be relocated with the animal. But that's a pitch. And then the reality is you have to go out and try to get this green dot bear to go where you need it to go, and you can't influence it. I mean, and we had extra scrutiny on us because we were trying to pull back the curtain on this whole industry, so to speak. So we, you know, I don't think we would have ever baited animals anyways, but we were very, very careful about not breaking any rules and keeping our distance. And so honestly, it's a collective story told through a group of bears. We were casting a particular juvenile young male. Typically that's the one that gets into trouble. And we sort of positioned ourselves along the journey in hopes that, you know, certain things would happen. And then because we're independent artists and we didn't have anyone sort of breathing over our necks telling us we had to do this or that, we were able to remain open to the moment. And so then the film is sort of both a combination of this early structure that we had and also just the moments that actually happened.
Yeah, and I think we were lucky in the sense that because we were making something about the bears that have those boundary issues and are around town, we didn't have to go very far to get a lot of these behaviors, but we did spend a lot of time filming, so yeah. Yeah,
I mean, there's 700 hours and it is a 14-month edit, so, you know, it's a lot.
But all the, like, really cool stuff is in the movie, so you're not missing too much,
This is
don't
the
worry.
highlights.
Well, what are your feelings around the ethics of relocating the bears and realistically, like what might?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. When they first started testing out relocating them, there was this one guy who like got them to forklift all these bears onto a what kind of
into like a World War II like big plane or
big
something,
plane,
a bomber.
and then they like woke up halfway through. They had to retrank them in there. Then they forklifted them out, and then as they flew up, they could see one just ran back and made it all the way back as they did. So it's like, it just seems like a kind of futile effort. I know that a lot of...
Yeah, it's Sisyphusian, I would say. This is unfortunately the end of a long line of trial and error. And the techniques that were used previously are actually pretty similar to what you're still seeing. So maybe there's a conversation that can happen about maybe more passive approaches, because it's a Band-Aid effect, right? It just makes the problem worse. And something that was really interesting to me is like recidivism in the United States. When you go to prison, you're more likely to go back. That seemed to be the same case with these bears. The more they got into trouble, the more likely they're getting into trouble the next time. And so they're just being penalized for being a bear, and that feels wrong.
Questions? Yes.
Very good read out there.
Oh, the green dot bear. I hope he's safe. I mean, the reality was the scene that you see at the end where he sort of like wanders off into the sunset. That was the final scene that we had with that bear. So he didn't come back to town. He didn't get shot. That year. So I think he's still out there, and it's really interesting. And a lot of questions sometimes come up about why they passed on the bear, and so I'll answer that too, because they passed on several bears. It was a multi-day hunt, and they didn't want a bear that had been eating at the trash, because it was toxic, and they eat these animals. And additionally, before the bears were marked with this green dot, hunters in these communities would hunt them, and then they get violently ill from eating this tranquilized meat. And so they didn't want a bear that was tainted, it wasn't taboo. And so it's an interesting irony that the trauma of the bear is also sort of what saved his life.
Yeah, and they didn't start putting the green dot until families started getting really sick because they hadn't been told that the bear had been recently tranquilized. So.
Yeah, they didn't give us the GPS tracking data. It's tagged with that.
They would not let us
They would
follow.
not give. So it was blind faith that the bear showed up in the next town. Like it made me believe in God or something like that. I don't know.
Awesome, amazing, everything, story, can you share with us how it felt to be the recipients at a lot of years?
Yeah, my personal philosophy is that I don't know that we need to award art because art should just be experienced, but I am also very grateful for it. It was, so,
Yeah, I highly recommend it. It's still paying dividends.
Yeah, it is great to have people that you respect reciprocate and appreciate your work. One of the jury members is a filmmaker that I really admired, so it was definitely a pinch me moment.
Yeah, the director of Paris is Burning, I think, was the head jury member, which was, amazing. We didn't have any idea it was going to happen either. We asked our producer, and he was like, "No, normally they'll tell you in advance, so sorry, buddy." So we went in there kind of thinking like, "There's no way," and then they said Nuisance Bear, and it was like, I don't know, it was like a moment of destiny or something like that, I'm not sure. It's like a warm embrace.
I'm a little interested in the hearing loss of the bears, and it sounds very much like it was due to the techniques that they were using shooting. Yeah. So what did you learn about that, and is it really a given that that's the case?
Great question about hearing loss and the bears. This is something that Mike brought to our attention. So we hadn't put it together until he was like, they're totally going deaf because of the crackers. And so, we didn't question that information that was coming from Mike. I don't know how he knew it, but after he said it, then you start to look at the footage a little bit differently, and there's a moment where the bear escapes that trap, right? I think this is the first moment this comes up. And they cracker it and it explodes like right in its face. These are animals that have way more sensitive hearing than we do, and if we were to have a cracker explode in our face, we would have hearing damage, right, at the very least. So imagine a lifetime of that bear, and that particular bear was like a 1,200-pound monster. They had to tranquilize it and lift it out of the trash with like a bulldozer and stuff like that. So it had all these scars on its back because it had tricked the traps in the past. And I think that's why they were crackering it so aggressively, because the other crackers that were a bit further away was having no effect. And so they were rubber bullying it, shooting it with rubber bullets. That wasn't really having an effect. And so then they got frustrated and started exploding them right in the face, which is really that's not allowed.
Yeah, so it's like, we're not scientists. We can't scientifically prove it, but it just seems kind of logical. Yeah, there's been cases where they've crackered and it's hit their stomach and then ripped their stomach. And
they hit the jugular and they bled out. Yeah, this is very rare that happened only once, but it's like these crackers are not just.
And I've shot the crackers and they're very loud.
Yeah, so.
And that was not towards my head, so I don't know.
Yeah, and what about the disconnect between the Mike's belief about the population increasing or decreasing? What do you know about that?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that was really shocking. We didn't have any idea that there was any dispute about the numbers, I guess. We had seen that they were in decline because that was the narrative that, you want to answer it differently? Go
Yeah, no,
ahead.
sorry. So there's 13 subpopulations of polar bears. The one that we're filming with, their numbers have been stable for years. They actually had an increase, which then made the seal population go down, and then they decreased, but it had nothing to do with climate change. Climate change is real, and they will be affected by the lack of ice. But so far, this population has been pretty good. And then the reality is, there's no good way to count bears and to keep track of their population. So my favorite example is this subpopulation. One year they're like, oh, there's 800, or they're down 200, and then it turned out the neighbor subpopulation was up 200. And the other way that they count them is by flying over with helicopters, counting. So it's
pretty rudimentary, it seems like, the techniques for collecting this information, unfortunately. And so I don't think we can say one way or the other, but I think that's what we can say, that there's not a definitive answer, and that there's fossil evidence that polar bears existed for somewhere between 10 to 20,000 years without any ice. So, that's kind of remarkable.
So you have Inuit saying we're seeing more bears. People are telling us they're going extinct, and that's frustrating for them. Of course, that's a bit anecdotal because they're not seeing the entire population.
Yeah.
There are subpopulations that are doing worse than others. They tend to be more around Alaska and further up north, and I don't know how they're doing in Russia because of everything with the war. But so this is the reality. It's very complex.
I mean, what I will say is that these animals are incredible, and they're much more intelligent than I think the average human. And so my guess is that they're going to probably outlive us, so we should worry about our own behavior as well.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, I think hope this film to help change policy and understanding between Inuit and the Canadian government and all of that. Because I feel like they're each working in their own vacuum and no one is talking to each other.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's like the biggest impact goal that we feel like we could have with the film, is that it could be like a discussion tool for different key, stakeholders in this issue to be able to see it from a different perspective. Of course, we have a bias too. We're trying to tell a story, but we're really open to meeting with policymakers and people in these communities to sort of get their opinion about the film and see if there can be, more of a dialogue. Because there isn't a desire for that. It's just that there was such a low barrier, set, I think, in terms of doing research and just the colonial history in the North. And so there just needs to be a more,
Yeah, I think it's starting. It's starting to have more of a. There's a lot of scientific groups that are now starting to actually listen to Indigenous people a bit more. There was 10 years ago a big sort of community get-together between the two communities, and everyone was like, "It was so great," and we're like, "What happened? Just keep doing it,"
Yeah.
But there's obviously ideological differences. A lot of people are really judgmental in Churchill about the hunting, and they don't want to even hear about it.
And Arvida is a dry community, and Churchill has a liquor store, and so the bootleggers go down to Churchill and pick up, thousands of pounds of alcohol, and so there's also this Churchill's it's like there's a bit of a Sodom and Gomorrah situation going on too.
So it's everything's very complex.
Yeah. Yeah, we wrote it together, so a lot of it was I think we did maybe 7 or 8 interviews together that were all about an hour, 2 hours each, and he would just drop these incredible sort of wise, riddles, and then you get into the edit and it would be 30 seconds long, and you'd be like, oh no, how do we get this to match with the images? There's too much talking to the visual ratio, and translating to English is really difficult because, or one joke describes it as looking through a bent mirror. It's never going to be one-to-one. So there had to be this collaborative process where we were sort of interviewing him and then taking the things that we thought were the most interesting or the themes that we were trying to explore, and then putting them in with the visuals. He would watch that. Then we tried different lines together. So it was a really kind of intense workshop process that was both a combination of everything that he said and then kind of ideas that we had as well, which was that we wanted to frame this as sort of a natural history movie a little bit in the beginning so that you can be misdirected. And so that's sort of more of where our hand came into it. No, it's all in Inuktitut. We had an interpreter there all the time, so he would say something in Inuktitut, then it would be translated to English, and then I'd maybe suggest a variation of that, and then we'd do it in Inuktitut.
It was a very long process.
Yeah.
One more question, yeah.
So without really knowing the distance between the towns, the sense I got was that like the community felt like maybe Churchill was sort of dumping their nuisance bears up towards them.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what was
Exactly,
causing
yeah.
the feeling, or like how far apart are these?
They're about 150 miles, so it's like a distance, but like for a bear, it's like 4 days. We heard one bear ran, and it was 2 days. So they're just like there's a highway, and the dump is like takeout. So they're just being. I mean, you guys live with bears, you know how it is. They get a food reward, and then they're gonna remember that pizza in that bush for like 10 years. So that's basically what happened. That a mom took that bear to that dump at some point, and so when it got dropped off, it was like, oh yeah, gonna go to RV it.
Yeah, and Churchill, if this is the Hudson's Bay, Churchill's on a little peninsula, which is like historically always where the bears would wait to go on the ice because it's where it freezes first. And Arviat's a little further up. And so, now that you have this community that never existed because the government force relocated people, over time, then the bears are like, oh, there's food here. And so where a lot of Inuit felt like we never saw bears like this, they're now seeing it because of modernity.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem with waste management. I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, just spending a few days here in Mammoth, I mean, you guys have way more secure trash cans. It's like not that difficult. So it's easy to point fingers and say, why don't they have these things? I mean, there are economics, there's race involved. It's incredibly difficult to get there. It's fly-in only. But I think the fact that there's a response to the film and these animals, I'm hopeful that there will be donations made that can help improve the situation.
Yeah, but it's also important to remember, I mean, in our film, we are situating a big issue of waste management, but this is not the only issue that the community is dealing with. The main cause of death for them is suicide. There's a lot of other things they're dealing with, and so when I see the garbage issue, I see it as a human issue. I think we all create a ton of waste, oftentimes in wealthier places or more developed places. We don't see it as much, so we don't think of it as our issue, but I think it is an issue that we all have to contend with.
Yeah, thank you for that. So you mentioned that you might want to. Yeah, no.
I hate it.
You mentioned that you might want to pivot away from wildlife films. So what's in your future? Do you have any specific projects or?
I think I'm going to become a doctor or something like that. Something useful. Start over.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about something like this, especially with wildlife, when people see that you've done that, they think that it's like a genre, so they're like, that's what you do. It's like, well, no, we do a lot of different things. I think it would be nice, as much as I love documentary, to take a step back and do something scripted, just because it is so emotionally draining. You're dealing with real people's lives. And so I feel like as an artist, I need to take a little break to eventually come back to it again.
Yeah, last wildlife film, like I said.
Well, just such a pleasure to have you both here. Thank you for coming out, and best of luck with whatever you do next.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.